So please welcome to the stage, Gale Buck from Raleigh, North Carolina.
I've got to tell you that this stage brings to life the most incredible stories. I once heard Kim Whitecamp on this stage tell a tale about Noodlin for catfish. Then I stumbled across hillbilly hand fishing on the Animal Planet, and I watched grown men and women in the muddy waters of the Red River catching oversized catfish using just their hands as hook and bait. Well, next time my wife and I went camping at Davidson River, I thought I'd try my hand at Noodlin. But the Davidson River is stocked with trout by the U.S. Forest Service, so I didn't figure on catching any trout by hand. But there's these other critters that live around the river called frog biters. Now, a frog biter is about the size of a plum, and he's got a mouth big enough to put a hurting on a good-sized rabbit. I've seen it happen. They're called frog biters because when tadpoles first become frogs, their skin is silky smooth. That is until a frog biter gets a hold of them, and a wart raises up wherever the biter chomps. Well, I climbed down into the river, right there at the meadow in the middle of the campground, and started looking for holes. You see, frog biters live in the riverbank right below the tree roots. I found a couple likely-looking holes, so I grabbed the stick up from the river and poked it in the first hole. There it is empty. But when I poked it in the second hole, it didn't go in so far. All of a sudden, I heard a loud crunch. When I pulled the stick out, the end of it was missing. I found me a frog biter. Well, I positioned my feet just so for the maximum stability, curved my fingers, and thrust my hand into that hole. I felt something move. So I curled up my fingers and I pulled whatever it was out. I had me a frog biter. Well, actually, he had me. He chomped down on my fingertips and was not about to let go. When I squeezed that sucker, I heard the most horrendous squeal. That squeal went in both ears, rattled around my brain for a few seconds, shot down my spine, and spread out across my back. Then I learned something about frog biters. I always thought frog biters were solitary creatures, but when one's in trouble, the whole neighborhood comes running. Within seconds, I felt as though there were hundreds of critters all over my arm. Why, from my elbow to my wrist was covered. Well, 6 or 7 of them anyway. But my arm was burning with an intense pain. I started flailing my arm. I smacked it into the river, and I smacked it up against the riverbank, even hit a large tree a couple times. The crowd that had gathered up on the trail started to back away, except for one delightful lady who joined me in the river. She dipped a towel into the water, wrapped it around my arm, and slid it from my elbow down to my wrist. Every single one of those frog biters disappeared, including one on my fingers. But my arm started to swell in warts, and those warts started getting warts, and then they started getting warts, and it was painful. Well, that lady looked at me and said, "You need to get to the fish hatchery. Ask for Edna. Now hurry." I didn't ask any questions. I said, "Thank you," climbed out of the river and ran back to my campsite. My wife took one look at my arm and panicked. She wanted to rush me to the hospital. In intense pain, I told her, "No, take me to the fish hatchery and ask for Edna." She thought I had completely lost my mind, but she did as I asked. Within minutes, we were racing up the highway to the fish hatchery. When we got there was nobody in sight. We walked over to the door and marked "No admittance, authorized personnel only." As I started to knock on that door, it opened, and there stood a lady who could have been a twin to a gal down in the river. "I need to see Edna." Well, she looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm Edna." And I said, "You've been in frog biters. Come on and follow me. You're in luck. We happen to be harvesting today." Well, we went into the harvesting room, and Edna called across to 2 men squeezing eggs out of a big fat trout. Said, "Hey boys, we've got a bad case of biters. Would you give me a big bucket of those eggs, please?" One of the men brought over a 3-gallon bucket filled with fresh trout eggs and set it on the table. "Now put your arm in there and start stirring." Well, I put my arm in those eggs and started stirring. I want you to know the pain, the burning, the agony stopped immediately. As soon as I started to take my arm out, Edna stopped me. "Oh no, you want to leave your arm in there until those warts are gone." Well, I put my arm back in there and kept stirring. After about 10 minutes, the eggs began to move. They began to vibrate and agitate. The water came alive. By the time Ed had told me I could take my arm out, we could see fish in those eggs. Not little minnows, but real trout. And the bucket was beginning to boil over. Ed had told me to pick up the bucket and to follow her. My wife and I followed Ed now to an old abandoned runway that still had water running in it. This is where they used to raise trout. She told me to dump the bucket into the runway. And as it was getting awfully heavy and the water was about to boil out of it, I did so quickly. As soon as those eggs hit the water, they hatched into 8-inch trout. Weird looking fish too. Every one of them had warts all over their forehead. And before we knew it, they started attacking one another. Not just nibbles and bites. They would open their mouth and swallow another fish whole. While I saw one fish eat another, and before he could turn around, he was eaten by a bigger fish. Every time a fish ate another one, they grew in size. Visibly grew in size. Hundreds of fish diminished quickly down to about a dozen. Every one of them over 24 inches long. But now they had room to swim, room to maneuver. The feeding frenzy was over, and it was a battle for survival. Quickly they got down to 5, 4, 3, 2. 2 rainbow trout, 48 inches long with warts all over their head. They sidled up next to each other and slid through the water in perfect harmony. Well, if one slipped forward, the other one was right beside it. Seconds became minutes. And then after nearly an hour, something happened. One of the fish jumped up into the air like he was going after a fly. Then the other one flipped up, and they faced each other with their mouths wide open for attack. Before